Hi guys, welcome back to another lesson from Arts Cool Media. Here today with Gavin O'Donnell. We hope you all had a great day at Tayto Park and we look forward to seeing you all again real soon. So today we are going to be drawing Mr. Tayto. I'm going to show you how to use the stencil system, and then we will take a look at some of the supplies that I use, and then we'll move on into the drawing. So on the stencil system we're going to be lining up our square and diamond on step 1, and then the 2 squares in step 2, and then the 2 diamonds in step 3. So I use Derwent pencils. I have a range from 2H being the lightest up to 8B being the darkest. So it'd be a good idea to try and get a nice range of pencils. I also use these blenders. These are just paper stumps. I use these for smoothing out the shading. And these are erasers that I use. This is another eraser. I also use a tissue for blending. I just wrap it around my finger and then move it in a circular motion to smooth out the graphite on the paper. I also use mechanical pencils a fair bit. I've got a 0.5 and a 0.7, so you'll see me using it a fair bit during this drawing. So this is our reference, and we'll get started with our stencil system. I'm going to firstly mark in the square and the diamond down the bottom right, and then I'm going to move on up to the square and diamond in the top left. Make sure you hold your stencil down nice and firm, and then start marking in the shapes. I've taken a light pencil to do this. It's a 2H or an F pencil, and I'm just very lightly drawing in the shapes. And then we'll just move on down to the feet or the shoes. So once you have all the shapes done, take it away, make sure it looks something like this, and then we'll move on to step 2. So I'm going to line up my 2 squares very carefully, and then I'm going to move on in and draw in the shapes. Again, I'm just drawing them in very lightly, taking my time. So you should be left with something like this after step 2. We'll move on to step 3 now. I'm going to line up my 2 diamonds. Make sure you get these as accurate as possible, as this will help with your drawing. Same with the other steps. Make sure they're lined up exactly. So we'll start off with the rope up here, and then move on down to the shapes on his body. So this is what you should be left with, guys. Once you're happy with this, we'll move on into the drawing. So I'm going to start off up the top right with the rope that's attached onto his body, and I'm just going to start lightly marking in the shading of this part. I've moved the reference a bit closer so you can have a better look at what I'm doing. So yeah, I'm just working on the top here of the zip line where it attaches on to the rope. And I'm just going to be looking back and forth from my reference all the time. And I'm just taking a light pencil, it's a F or 2H pencil, to do this section. I also use a brush to brush off the bits of rubber and lead that get left over. So I'm just very carefully marking in where I think these sections go. Then I'm going to move back down to the rope and I'm going to use hatched shading. And we'll start marking in this finger now. So we've got 3 fingers here and then a little thumb hidden behind. So make sure you get the little thumb in there too. And I'm just making the lines a bit stronger. And then adding little flicks to give the idea of the rope up here. When you're happy with your lines and where you have the shading done in, you can come back in then with a darker pencil. Like here, I'm using an 8B pencil. And this is a blender. This is going to smoothen out the shading and make it blend together better. And then I'm going to take my lighter pencil again and come back in and darken up the rope. And then I'm just going to clean up the edge with my pencil eraser. Again, I've taken my darker pencil and I'm just doing the underside of this rope where it attaches to the line. And this is another blender I have. You can buy those blenders in any art shop. They're just called paper stumps, or there's a fancy name for them, tortillons. But if you ask for a paper stump, the person in the art shop should know what you're talking about. So I've just taken my mechanical pencil now and I'm going to line up where this rope comes down and joins on to his belt. I'm just getting the edges of his top, where it comes up and beside the wrist there. The whole time I'm looking back and forth for my reference. And it's just one step at a time. You're going to need a lot of patience for this because it will take a while. And I'm just getting an idea of where this rope joins on to the belt. I'm lining things up where they meet each other and where the objects go in relation to other objects. So I'm just lightly sketching in that part first. So with this part you're going to need to really take your time and really look at your reference photo, and also make sure your pencil is nice and sharp because this will help. And when you're first marking it in, do it in a light way, and then when you're confident and happy about that line, you can then darken it up. So you can see me here darkening up these lines now that I'm happy with them. And then I'm just thickening up the rope a little bit with my eraser and making the lines a little bit thinner so the rope appears to be thicker. So there's a little dark section there inside the sleeve, so make sure you include that. And then his shirt underneath comes above that shadow. So I've taken my mechanical pencil here again, and I'm going to darken up the edge of this rope, and then just where it goes in behind his jacket there. And then again on the other side I'm going to use the mechanical pencil, and then I'm going to darken up this side. This side is a lot darker than the other side, so once you have a nice line there, you can grab your darker pencil and darken up this side. And then we'll use a medium shade, like maybe 4B, 3B, to balance it out in the middle. I've also taken my blender to smoothen out my dark shade. And then I'm just up at the finger and getting those shadows in there around the knuckles. So there's little kind of curves at the bottom of each finger where it meets the knuckles. It's kind of the way the shading is. And then it's darker in between the grooves. And then I'm just going to darken up these fingers now, slowly but surely. Once I'm happy with those shadows, then I'll darken them up further to meet my reference. So there's no rushing this. It's going to take an hour or so. And this is slightly sped up also, so I'm not actually moving at this speed. So if you fall behind a little bit, don't be afraid to pause it just to catch up. And then just getting that shadow underneath the little finger. Just where the rope goes in under the hand. And then I've taken my mechanical pencil again and I'm going to sharpen up these lines around the sleeve. And then this corner here is a little bit darker also, just where it curves around. And then we got these little bumps of the sleeve where it just joins on down into the just down to the armpit area. So I'm just lining up now his waistcoat. I'm just roughly sketching in where I think these lines go in relation to other lines. So you see this part of the waistcoat comes over the initial line there of his face. It just comes over that ever so slightly, and it kind of curves around and then disappears up behind the belt. And then we got these little sections then on the middle belt here. And I'm just going to mark in some of the areas of the belt and the pockets. So I'm just going to sketch in the little buckles of the harness now, and just roughly where they go. And same with this pocket here on the waistcoat. We're just going to establish these parts first. And once you get one, it's like a puzzle, once you get one piece, it'll make it easier to get the next line and the next line. That's the way I find it. So I look for the easiest line to find first, so it'll make my other lines a little bit easier to find in relation to that line, if that makes sense. So where this harness comes up here, it just kind of curves around. And then we have a little bit of shading on the sleeve here. I'm just going to use my cross hatched and hatched lines. These are just basically where you put lines close together and they're going to be the same weight. And then if you do a cross hatched, you do lines in the opposite direction, so you create these little kind of square shapes, diamond shapes. And then we've got a little shadow then from the rope, that it just leaves a little shadow there on his sleeve. And I'm just putting some hatched lines in here on the pocket of the waistcoat. I've taken my darker pencil now and I'm going to darken up the edges of the sleeve and the harness. And again, I'm just establishing where the lines go first. So we've got another little pocket here on the bottom of his waistcoat, and then I'm going to sketch in some more of his harness now and the buckles. This part is very tricky, so I really took my time with this. So again, I'm just doing it one step at a time, one line at a time, just to build up the area. So all the little buckles are, I've left them white. So the parts of the harness and the waistcoat are going to be a darker shade or value. So I was just touching up some of the buckles there with my eraser, making them a little bit lighter and a little bit easier to see. And just down at the armpit here, we've got it's a little bit darker in there. And then I'm just darkening up the waistcoat, getting it to the right value of my reference photo. So this line down here at the bottom will line up through the belt. You'll see how I kind of practice the line first, and then I go over it then properly once I'm happy with that little practice line. So then if you don't have a mechanical pencil, you'll need a really sharp pencil for this part. If you're trying to do the detail of the harness and the buckles, you're going to need a very sharp pencil. So I'm moving on to the shoe, and I'm going to sketch in the curve first and just establish where the sole is, and then the curve of the shoe above that then. So the sole it kind of curves out a little bit to the top right, so it just comes out a little bit further than the rest of the shoe. It's a little bit tricky, but just take your time with it. If you make a mistake, you can rub out a part of it. You see me rubbing out a fair bit with my pencil eraser just to get it right. So once I get my sketched lines in first, I'll take my darker pencil and come back in then and make things more definite and darker and all of that. So just make sure you leave a little shine on the shoe, just up to the kind of top middle part of it. The shine's very small, so just do like a light little outline and then leave it negative or leave it empty, and fill in the areas around it. So I put down my dark shades, and then I come in with my blender or my paper stump, and then I go over that graphite to make it smooth and blended. So I'm just getting these little stripes in now, and these are quite tricky, so again, take your time. And then another thing to note is the reference might be a little bit bigger. Well, in my video anyway, the reference is bigger, so I'm doing things a little bit smaller than they are in the reference. So I'm working on another section of the harness now. I'm putting little shadows under the pockets of the waistcoat, and then there's a little button, and just shade that in, a little circle, nice and dark. And then I'm lining up the pockets of the waistcoat with the areas of the harness and seeing where those lines go in relation to the lines of the harness. Like I said before, it's just one line at a time to to make your next line easier, so you can line up that line with the object that you've just drawn in. So again, I've sketched in a part of the harness with a light shade, and then when I'm happy with the placement of that, I come in with my darker pencil, my 8B pencil, and now I'm just revisiting some of the areas of the harness, just darkening them up. So now the fun part, we're going to move on to the face. I've started off by placing little highlights in the eye. Now, these highlights are very small and they're in the exact same place on each eye. So what I do first is I mark them in, and then I leave them negative and I go around the rest of the eye with a darker shade, and I just leave these little white spots. I just leave them alone, I don't touch them. So again, I start off with a light shade. When I'm happy with that, I come back with a darker shade and make it more definite. Again, if you haven't got a mechanical pencil, make sure you have a very sharp pencil. So I've taken an F pencil now, and I'm just marking in the little shadows behind the eyes of Mr. Tayto. And once you do that, we'll move on to the eyebrows. Again, these are in a very particular place, so take your time trying to get them right. Just line them up the best you can, and make sure you get them the right thickness. They're very thin, and then the way they curve is very particular as well, so again, just take your time with that. Just sketch them in first, see if it looks right. If you're happy with that, then fill them in again, see if it looks right, and if you think it does, then darken them up. So I'm going to move on to the area of the nose now. The line that we are given on the left hand side, we can erase that. We just need the line down the bottom of the nose and the line to the right hand side of the nose. So this line comes down and curves around, and we've got another line just above that. It's like the exact same curve, it's like a V shape, and that kind of just joins up with the top part of the nose. And these are very light, so the way I'm using my pencil, I've got my pencil to an angle. It's almost perpendicular to the page. It's side by side with the page. So when I do this, it gives a very light shade onto your paper. It's a very soft way of adding shading. So here I've just taken my tissue and I've wrapped it around my index finger, and then I apply that to the graphite to smooth it out. And then for these little areas, I've taken my blender because the areas around the eye are a lot smaller. So bigger areas I use a tissue, and then smaller areas I use the blenders. So once you have the nose done, we can move on to the mouth. I'm just trying to establish where the mouth goes in relation to the waistcoat and in relation to the nose. Again, it's in a very particular place, so I was just trying to establish where the little kind of chin area is first, and then I just lightly kind of sketch in the mouth part now. Yeah, this part is pretty tricky, so if you just lightly sketch it in first and see if it looks right. Don't go straight in with a dark pencil, because if you make a mistake then it will be hard to erase. And then see here, I'm lining up the edges of the mouth with the eyebrows. See, the eyebrows kind of come down in a straight line. The one on the right hand side does anyway, and it kind of lines up with the edge of the mouth. So just do like, you know, a little practice line up to the eyebrow just to see if it lines up with the edge of your mouth. It's a good way of being able to tell if it's in the right proportion to the rest of the face. And then I've taken a slightly darker pencil and I'm going to thicken up the mouth. And I'm still coming back in with my eraser the whole time, sharpening up, correcting little mistakes. And then I brush it away. And the curves at the top of the mouth up towards the cheek, you know, they have a very particular curve, so I'm just going back and forth with my eraser and just correcting it each time. So once you have that in place, we can start shading around the mouth. Just to note, there's a little white space above the mouth and below the mouth, and then the shading starts then, so just make sure you include that there. You can see how I've left a little white gap. And then again, I'm just using my light pencil and I've got it angled pretty much perpendicular to the page. It's at a very low angle. And then I'm just shading in the rest of the face, and I'm going to build it up slowly. I always start off with the light shade first, and then we can add dark shades later. And I'm just touching up the nose, getting the right values and shades. And then up at the top here we have a little shadow that is cast from the Mr. Tayto's hat. And then I'm just going to get the curve of the hat at the top there. Again, take your time doing that. When you're happy with that, you can start working on the hat then. I'm just going to continue on with adding some shades and shadows to the face, looking back and forth from my reference photo the whole time. And I'm going to darken up the shadow cast from the hat now. I've taken my mechanical pencil, which is a slightly darker lead, and I'm just slightly darkening things up. And then see how I'm leaving this white space above the mouth. Again, this is sped up very slightly, so I'm not moving at this speed. I'm taking my time here. I just had to speed this up because we'd be sitting here all day if I was to play it at the real time, and the real time it took to draw this. So I've taken my tissue and I'm going to just kind of smooth things out now. You can see how it kind of reduced the darkness of the mouth, so I just have to go back in and darken up the mouth a little bit. But everything else is nice and smooth now. And then we can start applying more shades and more darker values. And then we're going to add darker values now to the top hat shadow. And again, I'm just back and forth, adding shades, smoothing them out, adding more shades and smoothing them out again. It's a slow process to create these nice soft shades. But you really just gotta take your time with it and don't get impatient. So now I'm just moving on to the top hat. I'm going to sketch in this top section first, and then see how it's dark on either side, and then we have a lighter shade in the middle. So I'm going to cover the whole thing first in a light shade from my mechanical pencil. So if you want to do this with a 2H or a B pencil, an F pencil, whatever you have, just a light pencil, and then we can add darker shades to either side. And I'm just adding more shades now to the hat. So I've taken my blender and just smoothed out those shades I left from my mechanical pencil, and then I've taken my darker pencil, my 8B, and I'm going to add those dark shades to either side. And then I'm going to bring them in a little bit more with my mechanical pencil. I'm just going to lean a little bit harder, and then we're left with this nice kind of shiny surface. So once you have that done, we'll move on to the bottom part. Note that I am leaving a kind of white line at the middle section. It's a very thin line, and it gets thinner as it goes over to the right hand side. So again, I've shaded in the light shades, and then I'm going to come back in with my dark pencil. And then I smooth it out with my blending stump or paper stump. And then I'm just going to add a nice little sharp line now to the edge of the, to the bottom of the hat with my mechanical pencil. And then I'm just fixing the shadow. And then just where the white line is, just below that is going to be a darker area of shading. It's a slightly darker value. So just softly add darker parts and build it up slowly. So this is going to be it for part 1, guys. Check out our part 2 for the rest of the drawing.